Today is June 10th, 2022. My name is Blair Williams. I'm here at the Cumberland County Historical Society with Mrs. Sylvia Waters and Joy Fleming.
Joy Waters Fleming.
Joy Waters Fleming.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Joy, I will hand over the questions to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Blair. As you've indicated, this is an interview of my mother. So I'd like to start first of all by asking you to indicate your full name.
My name is Sylvia A. Byers Waters.
Okay. And how old are you?
Too old. I was born March 7th, 1940. That makes me 82.
Okay. And where were you born?
I was born in Carlisle, Pennsylvania at the Carlisle Hospital.
Okay. Where do you currently live?
I currently live in Sweater Township, Dauphin County, Pennsylvania.
Okay. And Mom, we're just going to talk a little bit about your family background. So I know you know the answer to this. What was your father's name?
My father was Frank Edward Byers.
Okay.
He was born in Newville, Pennsylvania.
Okay. Do you remember when?
He was born in 1920, April 2nd, 1920.
Why is that date so significant? Why do you remember it so easily?
Well, I have a son born on that date also, April 2nd, and that would be Mark Edward Waters.
Okay, my brother, of course. So, Granddad, your father was born April 2nd, 1920 in Newville, Pennsylvania. What about your mother? What was her name?
My mother, Sarah Gertrude Snowden, was born in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and her birthday is November the 6th, 1921.
Okay. Now, are either of your parents still living?
No, they are deceased.
Okay. Okay. Do you remember when your father passed away? What year was that?
My father passed away in 2000, May of 2000.
And what about your mother?
My mother passed away in 2015.
Okay. Well, it sounds like they had very, very long lives.
They had very good and long lives. They were married over 60 years, and they had a wonderful, wonderful life.
Did they live most of their lives? Where did they live most of their lives?
Well, they lived in Carlisle most of their lives. My father grew up in Newville, but after his mother died, to use the term that my grandfather used to my father, he broke up the homestead after his wife died, and then I think my father moved to Carlisle.
And where did he move from?
From Newville.
Okay. Do you know roughly how long, you've indicated you were born in Carlisle and that your grandfather has a Newville connection, and that, I'm sorry, your father has a Newville connection and your mother has a Cumberland County connection. Do you know roughly how long your family has lived in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania?
Almost 200 years.
Okay, great. We'll talk a little bit more about that as our memories allow. You've indicated your father was from Newville and your mother was born in the Carlisle area. Do you remember your grandparents at all?
I do.
Okay, let's talk about on your father's side first.
On my father's side, I remember Pop Byers, George William.
Where was he from?
Pop was born in Newville. He had an interesting background. He was born in Newville, Pennsylvania, and his wife was Sarah Bell Byers. I'm not sure where she was born, but she died before I was born, obviously. But Pop lived to be a ripe old age in his mid-80s when he died.
Okay, did you ever visit Newville as a child?
Yes, many times.
What do you remember about Newville?
I remember that it was a favorite place for my father to go and tell us stories. Stories as a child you didn't really appreciate, but you listened to the first and second and third time. The fourth time you started wondering around, why is he telling me this again? Today I know why he told me, and I wish I would have listened a little more attentively. He told us about the homestead there. He showed us all the graves in the graveyard where many of our forebears were. I had an uncle by the name of Uncle Sam, who was just a wonderful, wonderful person. He lived in Newville. The only thing I can remember about Uncle Sam, it was always a treat to go and visit him. And he lived very close to a creek, down a little, I don't know, a little slope off the road and near a little creek. And it was a treat to go see Uncle Sam. I don't know that Uncle Sam married. I just didn't know that, but he was give out whatever treats he had to us, and it was a wonderful thing.
Okay, so you do remember Newville, and you
Yes.
remember some people, some relatives that were there.
Yes.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have come from a family of 6 girls. I'm the oldest, Sylvia, Maxine, Charmaine, Moni, Candy, and Linda. Linda is deceased. The rest of my sisters all live in Carlisle. Now, they lived in other places, at least 2 of them lived in other places, but they returned back to Carlisle. And believe it or not, they still live on B Street. It's not the house we grew up in, but across the street.
So the Byers girls are all in Carlisle.
The Byers, the B girls, are on B Street.
Okay, talking about B Street, is that where you lived as a child?
Well, I actually lived as a child on West Street in Carlisle when I was tiny. And I can remember it was during the war, and I must have been about 3 years old.
What war are you talking about?
I'm talking about World War II,
Okay.
I believe. And my father would take me outside and hold me in his arms and point up at the sky. And I could see the lights going back and forth because it was an air raid going on. And he would take me out, and he called me Sin Sin, and would point out different things to me. I can remember that vividly, like it was yesterday. We moved from West Street to B Street sometime later, and we lived in a very small house on B Street that was a converted a gasoline station. It was small, and as our family grew, it became too small. And that was at 338 B Street, and that house is still there. Other members of my family bought the house from my father and lived there. No relatives live there now. But right next door to 338, which is 336, where I lived from 12 or 13 until I left Carlisle, was a vacant lot. And as a kid, my father would come home from work and get me out into that vacant lot with him. And he would pull the weeds, he'd clear it, and I would help him plant a garden. And I can remember being on my knees on these boards and lining up these onions in a row. Everything was very precise with him. He had these lines of string, and I had to follow them through. And he had, we had a big garden there. Because our house was very small, and after the war, after he came home from the Navy after the war, not long after that, my father started saving after he started working at the Naval Supply Depot. And he bought the land next door and built a house there. And he built that house from scratch. He dug it, the foundation for it. I was there helping him. I couldn't hold the block, but I talked to the cinder blocks, but I talked to him. A couple times I stirred the mortar, and I can remember him doing that. And he had a tool that he used in between the blocks to smooth it out. And he built that house from scratch. Every board he knew, he drew the plans for the house. It was a very large house compared to the one we lived in. It's a sizable house, period. Even to this day, it would be known as a nice size house. And so I moved there, as I said, around 12 years old. And I can remember during the time that I lived on B Street, and while Daddy was building that house, Mommy and Daddy both worked. And Mommy and Daddy would come home and on maybe a Thursday or even on a Friday and give me money in an envelope. And he would tell me, he said, "Sylvia, you need to take this to the lumber company." and I would take this to the lumber company, which was very far. It was in the northern part of Carlisle, and I would pay every week the lumber company for the supplies that he used in that house. That was quite a hike. I tell you, I'd like to walk around, but that was a little much after school. And he would cash his savings bonds and use what he could save and pay those lumber bills. And he did a fantastic job. You know, it was thrilling to watch him do it, but you can't appreciate the significance of it until you look at the whole history of America and what people had, what they didn't have, and how important owning a property was.
What about what year was that, Mom?
We actually moved in there in 52 or 53. It took him about 2 years, I would say, to actually build it.
Is the house still standing?
The house still stands. I sold the house. We sold the house, my sisters, when my mother died. We tried to find someone in the family, but the younger people, they wanted to do something else, those that could have afforded it. But it's still there, and his handiwork will be there forever. Funny thing about it, kids from the Carlisle Army War College would come to school, and they'd come down B Street on the bus, and I would talk to kids that were in my class, and they would ask me where I lived, and I said, on B Street, near such and such a place. He said, oh, do you live in that house with the stucco, the stone on front? And I would say yes, and I was very, very proud of that.
Do you remember who else lived on B Street when you were growing up there?
Yes, my Uncle George, my father's brother. He thought of Uncle George as a surrogate father. They were very, very close together. They would hunt and fish together. And my Uncle George and my Aunt Marion lived across the street at, I think it was 350 B Street. And it was a beautiful house. It was a single house. It wasn't a big house. It was a frame house, but it had beautiful poppies and magnolias in the spring. And I would just love that place. And he had the best cherry trees anyone could possibly think of. And he would tell me, do not climb that tree and break any more branches. So I got smart and climbed up on the garage roof, got in the tree, fell off the tree, fell out of the tree, and there was a board with a nail sticking up. And so I couldn't hide that. So he knew that I was everyone knew it was an Uncle George's cherry tree. But it was a delight. He had a nice garden, a beautiful yard with beautiful flowers. And then there was, between that house and another house on B Street, there were two families, the Rice family and the Wright family. They came from the South, and I loved to go visit them because I loved their cooking. My mother did Pennsylvania Dutch cooking, although she was an excellent chef. I liked the soul food cooking from across the street best, and I learned how to cook some of those things. And then there was another family called the Grahams. And I mentioned those houses because not only were they good and close friends, but those houses were torn down and new houses were built, and my father bought those houses. And today, and he bought them and used them as rental properties, very nice properties, but today my sisters own them, and they live in, two of my sisters live in them. So I have a very close connection to B Street, not to mention it was the direct route to Carlisle Senior High School, where I graduated from.
Well, you know, you said that you had an uncle that lived next door or on the same street. Did you have any other relatives that lived on B Street that you remember?
Aunt Moni, Uncle George's wife.
Okay. What was Aunt Moni like?
Aunt Moni was hilarious. Aunt Moni.
Do you remember what her maiden name was?
Aunt Moni was a butler.
Okay.
Marion Butler.
Okay.
And she got the name Moni, M-O-N-Y, because as a child I couldn't say Marion, and I called her Moni, and so I named her Aunt Moni, and that's what she's known as. And her laugh was like unbelievable. And we would gather out front sometimes in the summer in our yards, and people would go by. And it was a direct road to Wagner's Gap out that way. And sometimes people, white people, would ride, and they'd see us out in the yards, and they'd get real drive They were surprised, I guess. And Aunt Mooney would look at them and say, yes, we're colored. And you could always depend on her to say something interesting.
Okay. What did your parents do for a living?
My father worked as a laborer after he got out of the Navy, and probably prior to the Navy. And then he was hired at the Naval Supply Depot, and he started there as a foreman, and worked up to being chief of grounds and maintenance for the whole depot. And we were very, very proud of my father for doing that. He dropped out of school in the 9th grade, and while he was at the depot, received his GED, and he was very proud. I don't know of any award that the depot has given that he was not a recipient of. He was very well liked, a good, honest, hardworking man, and a taskmaster, but we loved him dearly.
What about Grandmom, your mother? What did she do for a living?
Mommy raised us, and then she did various jobs, but the one I remember most is at the Carlisle Hospital, where she was hired to be an assistant in the kitchen. She was just probably hired in the kitchen. And then she worked up to become the assistant to Bob. And I can't recall Bob's last name for anything, but Bob was the chef, and everything revolved around Bob at the Carlisle Hospital. And Bob retired, and my mother was named the chef. And I think part of that was because of a dietitian there by the name of Miss Corrigan. She was so impressed with my mother and Sarah. And my mother made friends and was a very hardworking, industrious, and a very smart lady. And she retired as the chef of the Carlisle Hospital.
Where did you go to school? Do you remember where you went to elementary school?
Yeah, I went to Wilson Elementary School, and Wilson, 1st and 2nd grade, and Miss Hodge was my 1st grade teacher. Miss Hodge is a lady of renown in this area, and I knew how to read before I got to school, and Miss Hodge was impressed with that, but she wasn't surprised because they all knew Sarah Snowden, and Mommy was smart. And she taught me in 1st grade, and 2nd grade I had a teacher by the name of Miss Creighton. Now that was in Wilson School, right down the street from here, and that was during the times when schools were segregated. Integration occurred in Carlisle when I went to 3rd grade, and I went to 3rd grade right around the corner from where I live, believe it or not, Stevens Elementary, and I went there 3rd through 6th grade, and I had a wonderful time. All my childhood school days, I loved.
Okay. What about after Wilson? What school did you go to? Do you remember? I mean, after Stevens.
After Stevens, I went to the Lamberton building in Carlisle, and that was the high school. And you went there from 7th through 12th. But they were not long after that, they built a school straight out B Street, the Carlisle Senior High School. And so I went there for 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, and my class of 1958 was the first class that started this when the school opened, that went the whole way through. I do not remember that. I forget that. I had a nice time in school. I was very active in the choir, and Miss Anderson, I think, was the choir director. I loved art, and there was a Mr. Mullen that taught me. I liked writing, and I had some very, very good teachers. I can particularly remember, though, going back to Stevens Elementary, that in 5th grade, I used to sing a lot, and they put me on the public address machine singing, of all things, When the Caissons Go Rolling Along. And I shouted that song out loud, and everyone heard it. And then I remember in 5th grade, I built a theater, a puppet theater, a hand puppet theater. And I made the puppets, and I made the theater, and I wrote the script for the play. And I took it to my 5th grade class, and my teacher, Miss Taylor, was so impressed. She had me put this play on for the class. I enjoyed my school days.
What was the town of Carlisle like as a child? Do you remember?
Well, it's funny you'd say that, because where I lived on B Street and where this is located, we called this uptown. We're going uptown because we had to go uptown to the grocery store, we had to go uptown to the movies, go uptown to the 5 and 10, which was Woolworth, was just no longer there. I don't think there are any 5 and 10s anywhere anymore. But it was a bustling, small but bustling, and it was fun. We had right in this area, in fact, about right here, there was a movie theater, the Strand Theater, and then across the street that we just turned was the main theater, movie theater. So there were 2 movie theaters. There were nice stores, real nice stores. I don't think we have those stores. In fact, I know we don't have any stores anymore. One interesting thing is that the Carlisle Meat Market, which is right around the corner, used to be around the corner, was a forerunner of Giant Foods, and the people that owned that started Giant. So Carlisle had many, many things. The Carlisle Tire and Rubber Company and Maslin's, the carpet company. I don't think, they're no longer in existence in Carlisle, but they were 2 big employers, I do know.
Did you go to church when you were growing up?
I did.
Where'd you go to church?
West Street, AME Zion Church. It's still on West Street, off Chapel and West Street in Carlisle. And I enjoyed church very much. I learned a lot. I would constantly encounter people that knew Mommy. And Miss Anna Johnson used to sing on the choir, and I used to love to hear her sing, and I would sing on the choir with her, and she always had me take a message home to Mommy. And they used to tell me constantly about Mommy being in all the different things that the church had, and how well she could recite. And it was just, it was nice to go there, because so many people knew the family. And I appreciate that exposure so much.
Did you ever have a job when you were growing up in Carlisle?
I used to babysit. That came naturally to me because I had 5 younger sisters. But when I was a teenager, they started a program at the Carlisle Hospital, probably based on the candy stripers. And we wore these uniforms. There were about 5 of us, and I was the only person of color selected. And we wore these green pinafores and white blouses, and it had to be very starched, and the white shoes and white stockings. And my mother would look at me and tell me that my uniform was not pressed enough, invariably. But I learned a lot, and I also learned how well my mother was liked and respected at the Carlisle Hospital, because a lot of the nurses, they had a nursing school there, a practical nursing school there. Apparently they had to go through measurements and different things like that when they and learn about diets. My mother helped to train them, would be a better term. And so I had a little in there, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very, very much. At one time, I really wanted to be a nurse. I was very impressed with the people that I was exposed to, the patients and the professionals.
When did you move away from Carlisle?
I moved away from Carlisle in 1959. I moved from Carlisle to Harrisburg. There's something that I omitted. When I used to go to the Lamberton School, I walked past the law school all the time. And I can remember that walk so well, because you have to go up College Street from B Street to get to the Lamberton School. And I used to admire the buildings, and they had a building called the Saddler Curtilage, which is no longer there. They tore it down when they expanded the law school, when it when it became part of Penn State. It's now not part of Penn State, but it relates to me because my husband I met at a football game when I was in 12th grade, and he was a student at Dickinson School of Law, and it just came full circle. I said, oh, I used to walk past there all the time. And so I moved from Carlisle in 1959, after I was married in March of '59, to move to Harrisburg. My husband had just finished his cram school course in Philadelphia, and so we moved to Harrisburg, and we've lived there. That's his hometown. That's his home, and his family, the Waters family, is a large family and made many contributions to that area, good contributions to that area, and so that's why I moved.
So you married the person that you met who graduated from law school?
Yes.
And he was an attorney? Did he practice?
Paul E. Waters was an attorney. He worked for helped a gentleman by the name of James Rowland. He worked part-time there, and then he worked for the state government, and he ended up in state government being counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee. And after that person who was chair of the Judiciary Committee became the lieutenant governor, he knew him, and he knew some people from Philadelphia, minorities from Philadelphia, and they formed a group to get more minorities into state government, and my husband was in the forefront of that, so he was named named by Milton Shapp, Governor Shapp, to the Environmental Hearing Board. Sometime later, he was made chairman of the Environmental Hearing Board, and then when we had our first elected Attorney General, his name was Leroy Zimmerman. He was a law school mate of my husband. He called my husband and asked him to serve as first executive deputy Attorney General. So my husband had a very interesting career. He was a writer of law publications, amateur archaeologist, and we had 3 wonderful, wonderful children.
What about you? What did you do after you got married?
After I got married, I worked in short stints at the state, doing clerical work, answering phones and stuff like that. I took a couple courses, college courses, and then I stayed home most of the time until my children kind of got a little older. Then we built a house, moved from Harrisburg, we built a house in Sweaterra Township, and we moved there. And around that time, the liberation movement for women was becoming very, very apparent. And I decided I wanted to go to work. And I went to work, and I worked for 15 years in the Pennsylvania Department of Health as Director of Equal Opportunity for the Pennsylvania Department of Health. I don't know if you want me to expand what I did after that, but I worked.
Okay. Important to know. I just want to know, how has Carlisle changed since the first memories that you've recounted? You have sisters that live here, so you get back to town, you still have a connection, you have perspective in terms of what you saw as a child and now as an adult. What do you see?
The small town beauty of it is still there. That aura is still there. I don't see a lot of boarded up places, but I see places that are not the same. I also see progress, because I remember when I was growing up, other than the fact that I knew my grandfather Stoughton was a member of the fire police, we had one police officer in Carlisle who was a minority. You didn't see much representation of minority in any positions, political positions. Since then, I think Carlisle has had a mayor, at least, and a couple of city councilmen. And so I think the school system is still good, because I used to think it was an excellent school system. The Carlisle Fair, for example, was one of the highlights as a child growing up in the summer. I don't know if they still have the Carlisle Fair, but I know they have this internationally known car show that comes to Carlisle. The War College is still there. The college seems to be thriving, Dickinson. I really don't know much about it. My sisters don't say terribly much about it, other than the fact that the area that we lived out on B Street, where they used to have the Carlisle Tire and Rubber Company, that has changed. It's now an area of apartment buildings and offices and stores, and I think that's good. I think that's a nice change.
Okay. Those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you both for coming in today and for sharing your memories of Carlisle and Cumberland County.